Well, very excited to be here. What an awesome crowd. Big round of applause for Peter McCormick putting this thing together. I've done events before. I know how incredibly difficult it can be to put these things together. And thank you for everybody for showing up and participating in this event. Very excited to see so many people decide to travel to the small town of Bedford to listen to all of us rant and rave about our favorite topic, Bitcoin. And for this panel, one of my favorite topics or subtopics of Bitcoin is Bitcoin mining. We're going to talk about how Bitcoin mining is the cheat code for a variety of different things. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I want to go to someone that you're probably pretty familiar with. Harry down at the end here, he spent quite a bit of time on Peter's show talking about a variety of issues on Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, but we chatted a little bit back behind the scenes about what we want to talk about today, and what we're thinking about are the potential cheat codes of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And one of the questions that I have for you to start us off would be that most people in the world believe we have an energy shortage, but you quickly said that you believe we have a shortage of demand and not a lack of available supply. That's not the problem. Please explain a little bit why you think we need to have way more demand and not less.
Yes, 100%. We have a horrifying shortage of demand for energy, not a shortage of supply whatsoever. The reason is that the way that energy grid, like why does all the electricity here work, right? And there's not an event going on here every single day like this, but yet the energy that powers this room is available to this room 100% of the time. And the reason that is because the way our grids are engineered is to be able to match our peak usage at all times, not just our average usage. And so if we're going to actually get all of the economic value out of every electron that's getting generated, we need to have more productive uses for those electrons in a flexible way so that all of those revenues can flow back and continue to be reinvested in the broader economy or in the electric system itself. And so we need to bring more flexible customers to the electric system in order to maximize the value in that infrastructure. And so I think miners are sort of the very special unicorn that's able to be the first mover and the tip of the spear on the demand side on a flexible basis so that we're able to spur growth in our economy on the back of the electric grid, from day one.
Is that sustainable for normal human beings?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that humanity has been incredibly capable at generating electricity. And the reason that we aren't able to do more of that is because there's been regulatory challenges amongst many other reasons. But yes, we as a human species are going to generate an enormously greater amount of electrons as time goes on, and we're going to be able to put those electrons to work to increase prosperity all around the globe.
And it's more than that, though. Hold on, it's more than that. For humanity to be sustainable, we need more energy. It's actually the inverse, right? And if you don't believe me, come visit a village with me in Malawi and I'll show you why, right? There's a reason why we need more energy. And the truth about energy is just like Harry's saying. You have these peak demands from a community. It could be a small community in Malawi, or it could be a big community here in the UK. But you always have this delta of pockets of wasted energy throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the year.
Well, going to the comment of it not being sustainable, it's quite the inverse, right? You mentioned what's happening in Africa, but we also see, just from a purely, green energy perspective, that Bitcoin mining is utilizing very, very diverse energy resources, particularly in the renewable sector. Will, obviously, at Iris, that's being a very big goal of your organization to focus on utilizing underutilized renewable energy assets. So, as that being your focus, and in the ethos of cheat code, like what is Iris doing to use Bitcoin mining as a cheat code to be able to utilize energy like particularly wind and solar?
Yeah, so I think when we set this business up, a part of the reason for doing so was not just our love for Bitcoin, but we saw a big opportunity in supporting the rollout of renewable energy. So I founded the company with my brother Dan, and he spent a big part of his career building out these renewable energy projects, which are often funded by government incentives. And we've seen a massive build out of these renewable energy, but intermittent generation. So we saw a big opportunity, hop on the other side of that, and be a load that could tap into that renewable energy, but not just tap into it, be a flexible load that hasn't really existed before. Historically, when Western markets have had that volatility and you're trying to keep the lights on for mums and dads, there's been occasions where they've called on big aluminium smelters to curtail. And if you know much at all about aluminium smelters, which they're basically these big turbines, rotating turbines, you can't just turn them off. So they take a lot of time to turn down, so it doesn't solve the problem immediately, but there's lots of OH&S issues trying to shut it down quickly as well. So as an example, one of our sites is located up in the Panhandle region of Texas, and there's over 30 gigawatts of wind and solar, a massive renewable energy corridor. So 30 gigawatts. The transmission line has an effective capacity of 13 gigawatts to transport that down to the load centres. So for us, we saw an opportunity to go locate up there, absorb that surplus power, locate right next to the source of renewable energy, but also provide a flexible load so that when there's network issues, when the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine, we're able to curtail our operations and give that power, sell that power back into the network.
The ability to be able to go in and utilize renewable energy assets and then also turn around when others need it to be able to provide that energy back is an incredible feature of Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. You said 30 gigawatts. Could you maybe put that in context for people what that amount of energy means? Like, how many homes can we heat? I think it's like 1 million homes per gigawatt that you can heat during a winter storm. So it's an incredible amount of energy that you're able to tap into, but then also deliver back to the grid when needed the most. And so you often see that Iris is, in fact, talk a little bit about that grid balancing, talk about what it looks like to deliver that energy back to the grid.
Yeah, so as an example, in January this year, there was predictions of power prices going 100x. And it was looking pretty bad. There was a winter storm coming through. And when we got to that point, what we saw was gigawatts of large flexible loads, including Bitcoin miners, turning off, and it ended up being a nothing burger. Power prices ended up being pretty similar throughout the month compared to other months. So I think that's a real example of how having that flexible load that can switch off, when the network needs it, what impact it has to the rest of the network. And I'll also add that we get compensated for doing so. So this is a sustainable mechanism. We're located in there and it's sustainable, not relying on pure charity from Bitcoin miners to keep doing this and reliant on people to do it. So we've got an algorithm that's all automated that looks at the power market in real time, looks at the money we can make selling the power back into the market, and looks at how much we can make selling power into the Bitcoin network. And in real time, our machines ramp up and down based on what's more profitable. And the benefit of that is you get that flexible load where when the energy market needs it, by definition, the power price is going to be high, we're curtailing and giving it back.
It's an incredible feature that Bitcoin mining can provide to energy systems all over the planet. And it's something that is obviously we're seeing a lot of it happen in Texas. It would be my opinion that this will happen across the entire planet as time goes on. Texas has been an incredible example of what's possible with this technology. But staying in the vein of sustainability and environmental cleanup, Thomas, we chatted a little bit about your work over at Stronghold. You're on the board over there. And Stronghold is doing some very unique things and using Bitcoin mining as a tool to sort of catalyze environmental cleanup in the state. Talk about what's happening at Stronghold and how you guys are using Bitcoin mining as a tool to sort of economically provide for an option to clean up what you talked about was the coal refuge there in the state.
Yeah, so I'm going to do a very brief history lesson. The coal mining industry for 150 years in the United States, mostly like Appalachia, Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, blah, blah, blah. Lots of coal mines, lots of activity, and really the powerhouse for the United States that helped push the U.S. through 2 world wars. Over maybe a century and a half, it's a dirty business, and there's a lot of waste coal that's produced. Waste coal goes by many different names, refuse, gob, whatever. But effectively, it's a lower form of coal that has a lot of other stuff in it, and it wasn't valuable enough to just sell into the open market, so they would sort of cast it aside and create hundreds of acres, many hundreds of feet deep of these waste coal fields that just were next to these mines. In the 70s in the US, there was a series of regulations that amount to the Clean Air and Water Act that prevented the coal companies from continuing this practice of just casting the waste coal aside, which caused the coal mines to obviously leave and move on to other areas that were more profitable. So one of the things that coincided with the Clean Air and Water Act regulations was a network of specialized waste coal-fired power plants that had enhanced scrubbers and took some of the really nasty stuff out of the carbon that's created, the smokestack, to mitigate some of the fine metal particles and the other bad stuff that's there. In the 90s, when a lot of businesses left, and this goes to Harry's original point, we had, steel companies and other heavy industry that eventually was offshored. So Western Pennsylvania did not have the electricity demand that allowed the power plants to operate, at a commercially viable level until Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining provides effectively a floor of demand where the power plant can supply the local grid whenever they demand electricity, but if there isn't enough demand for the electricity, rather than shutting down the plant, which creates operational issues and effectively harms the plants, it's allowed to continue to run at capacity. And that's remediating the waste coal, which is a terrible pollutant for the water table. It seeps into the water table, it pollutes the land. You can look at, cancer maps, they're just elevated for, the communities that grow up around these fields. So it's a unique solution that I think is often overlooked. It's not just wasted energy or stranded energy, it's mitigating a very toxic pollutant.
I just want to pile on because he's underselling it a little bit. There's only 13 of these coal plants, I think, in the US that are able to manage burning essentially this.
There used to be many more.
Exactly. So there used to be many more. And so if you don't have the power plants that are able to manage this waste, it sits in the ground forever and will harm the population forever. But burning it is actually the single most environmentally friendly thing you can do. Stronghold receives a renewable energy credit for every megawatt hour they produce because it's so environmentally beneficial to convert the waste coal into their, I think it's a limestone output, basically. So I know we hear the word coal and everybody thinks it's horrible and we're going to all die.
It's not coal. It doesn't create more coal.
But essentially what it's doing is taking a highly toxic form of coal and converting that into an environmentally stable, population stable, human stable, and safe output. And because we do not have enough demand for energy, these remaining 13 plants are at risk. And if we lose those plants, we're saying we're comfortable with there just being this endless pollutant in our environment. But without the demand for the electricity, we don't get to go through this chemical process on an economic basis. And there's no will to build any more of these plants. So we're just kind of stuck with it.
So it's kind of similar to what happened in Germany with the nuclear power plants, right? Nuclear power plants take years to turn on, and also years to turn off. It's similar for other types of power plants, coal-fired facilities, natural gas. These take months to turn on and turn off, and when you turn them off, firing it back up when the demand comes back is not an easy process. So it's very difficult to unring the bell, which I think we're sort of seeing play out elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. Go to Germany and see how great it is.
We're talking a lot about demand already. And I want to shift over to Erik because what you're doing. And I want you to explain the magic of what you're doing. I try to explain it to people all the time. It's difficult conceptually to explain. It doesn't often compute in people's brains for more demand equaling cheaper energy. But what you're doing in Africa is truly revolutionary, and I think will have incredible impacts on that continent for years to come. But explain to people how you going in and using Bitcoin mining as a catalyst for energy, not only development, but for the reduction of the price of energy for rural African villages who have never had access to energy before. Talk about how that works and why Bitcoin mining is such a powerful tool for helping you enable those villages.
Yeah, so at Gridless, we do two things. We help decentralize the Bitcoin network by making sure there's hash rate in different parts of the world. And secondly, we help push electrification further to the edges in Africa. And the reason why that's important is actually understanding how the business of energy generation works, which I didn't know coming into this, so we kind of figured out along the way. Which is, it's actually not financially sustainable to build mini grids in rural Africa. Yet it has the single largest population of unconnected electricity people in the world of, well over 500 million people, right? Of the 1.1 billion in the world who do not have any electricity, not just access to electricity, but no electricity, 500 to 600 million of them are in Africa, okay? So everybody wants these people to be electrified because we know that electricity is that base layer for human progress. You can't get what you have here in Bedford without energy, right? That's the base layer for it, and the way we consume it is as electricity, mostly. So what's interesting is everybody wants these guys to be financed, so they get this concessionary financing from African Development Bank, European Development Bank, Rockefeller Foundation, these kinds of organizations. And there's this willful delusion between the energy developer and the energy financer that they're going to be somehow financially sustainable in the next 20 to 30 years. They all think, okay, well, in 8 years' time, we're going to have 36% usage of this by the community. In 15 years' time, we'll be at 55%, and then we're going to get to 80, and then the numbers will magically work out. It doesn't work that way. For example, we've found a site that's 15 years old in rural Zambia, and the most they've ever had is about 30% usage of their power, right? So what that means is it's not a financially viable investment for anybody to invest in rural energy electrification in Africa. So we come along and we put Bitcoin mining there to take them from 30% to 100% literally overnight, right? We come in with our 20-foot mining container, we plop it on the ground, 2,000 kilometers away from where we built it in Nairobi, through 12-hour drive from the closest airport, right? Through Africa's worst roads. We get there, we set up a Starlink, we set up a mobile connection. This over 2 days. The next day, the mining is happening, and that day, the energy producer has their wallet, and they make a revenue share with us. So they get money now every single day. They get paid in Bitcoin. Okay. This completely changes the way the energy producer thinks about their business, because all of a sudden they're financially sustainable and they can think strategically about what they want to do next. Where are they going to expand to? Should I build another site? And it changes the way they look at the economics of their business, because what they were having to do is charge somewhere between 36 cents and 96 cents per kilowatt. And by the way, in Nairobi, it's 25 cents a kilowatt. The average in the US is 12 cents, I think, per kilowatt. I don't know what it is in the UK, I'm sorry. But the interesting part is they're already paying a ton of money for this energy, and they have the least amount of disposable income to do so. So we come along and we're able to build this thing in, and you know what happens magically? First of all, more people get connected to energy now because it makes sense to do so for this energy company. And as they connect more people, we turn machines off, right? And we move them somewhere else. Two is they can lower the cost of energy for their community. So the very first site I remember we went into, it dropped from 36 cents to 26 cents the month we moved in, right? The price of power went down by 10 cents to them overnight, almost, right? So I think that's the interesting thing about what Gridless is showing, that there's a new model for energy to be developed. And, I think Troy Cross says it best. It's like, Bitcoiners don't just use energy, they pay for energy, right? And that's what we're doing, is we're actually paying for energy. And because of that, these are businesses that are financially sustainable. And that means that more people can be connected to energy at a lower price. And that's good for humanity.
Big round of applause, please. There's certainly a lot of things that Bitcoin mining can do that a lot of other users of energy cannot. This is something that me and you talked about here. And you previously, just recently, called it the unicorn of energy. Talk a little bit about it, what it means to be a unicorn, and what are some of the things that Bitcoin mining can do that other buyers of energy cannot?
Yeah, I think, to me, this is, there's three factors that are critically important to Bitcoin mining's unicorn status. The first is completely indiscriminate regional aptitude. So typically, if you're a huge, I don't know, an automotive plant, you have to be by a highway, and there needs to be a school system and a hospital system and infrastructure that can support the 1,000 jobs that are now coming to this area. And it's a big kind of complex exercise to make sure that you can support a manufacturing plant of that nature. But for a Bitcoin miner, we don't need any of that. We'll go to your most rural place. We'll go to your most off the beaten path place. We don't need any of that additional infrastructure and support in order to be able to offtake that same amount of power or more. The second is that we don't use very much land. And so when we look to go build a new site, our rough metric is somewhere between 10 and 20 megawatts per acre. So what that means is that like somewhere between 10 and 20,000 households worth of power per acre. And so we're not coming in and saying, oh, we need 2,000 acres to build a solar farm, or we need, some huge amount of land disruption in order to be able to handle this type of load. And so we've got geographic diversity, we've got density, and then we've got complete and comprehensive flexibility. So not only are we able to take down more power than any customer a utility may have ever met, but we're also willing to give it back on a very, very rapid and frequent basis. And so there is no other load that's able to give back hundreds of megawatts in a sub 1 minute interval. And so when things kind of go sideways, whether it's a winter storm or a power plant trips off somewhere else in the system, or some of these large scale disruptions, we're the first call. And oftentimes, because we're the first call, we're also the last call when it comes to stabilizing the environment in an event like that. I know you talked about the winter storm that we saw. We saw the same thing in Tennessee. It was Christmas Eve, and it was the first time rolling blackouts had ever happened in TVA. So what was the first call that all the utilities made? The neighborhood Bitcoin miner. It happened to be us for a couple of them. And we happily gave that power back. I'm happy to give back 10, 20, 30 hours of revenue if it means that households are not going to go cold in -5 degree weather. It's the right thing to do, and there are also programs that make it an economic incentive for us to do so as well. And so what we see is there is a market that's growing and developing on a free, non-governmental basis in order to solve a real-world problem. We don't need a handout. We don't need a taxpayer dollar. We don't need a subsidy. We just need a free and open market for electricity that incentivizes us to be the best corporate citizen that we can be.
It sounds like you're saying that Bitcoin mining is somewhat of the first responder for energy shortages. It's an incredible feature that we've seen happen, take place all across the country. It's another revenue stream, in fact, for miners. But real quickly, I want you to talk about the additional revenue streams that you've seen out there for Bitcoin miners. As we approach the halving, I think these additional revenue streams are going to be critically important. And once you nail down on what those are, we'll go to Will and Thomas to talk about their specific revenue streams.
Yeah, I think that, and I'll answer the halving question I think that was posed earlier. I didn't hear it live, but essentially, miners are one of the only businesses in the world that sign up to have their revenue cut in half every 4 years willingly. And so because of that, it puts an enormous amount of competitive pressure on our business. And because of that, we're forced to continue to push to the edge of innovation in order to recover as much of that lost revenue in Bitcoin terms as possible. Oftentimes, the purchasing power of Bitcoin unhalvens us, even though the number of Bitcoin that we're earning continues to go down. So I think there's that interesting dynamic. It's important to understand the competitive landscape highly incentivizes innovation, and Will and Thomas are both part of companies that are pushing that secondary revenue stream in really interesting ways. But it is something that we as a community have to think about all the time, because we know the revenue is going to go down on the Bitcoin mining direct side. So what are the adjacent opportunities that are available to us? I think demand response is an obvious and very compelling one, but these guys have talked about two others that I think are really cool.
Yeah, going down the path of additional revenue streams, I think it's very interesting because it's in alignment. I don't know has anybody here read, by the way, Brandon Quittem's Pioneer Species article? A few of you, not enough of you. Go read this article by Brandon Quittem, Bitcoin is a Pioneer Species. And it really effectively outlines through the lens of nature, how Bitcoin mining is going to be a catalyst for a number of different industries and potentially even new cities to be built around this new demand that we are seeing. But one of the most interesting things is that we see it already happening. We see it playing out, this theory that Bitcoin mining is going to go out and be a catalyst for new types of data centers, new types of load in places they've never existed before. And going to Will here, Will is part of a company, Iris, where they are already on this path. In fact, they were preparing for it. You've been in the industry for 6 years now, in the space for 6 years, but from the very beginning, we're planning for additional types of high density loads, including AI, specifically AI. Talk a little bit about how you are viewing AI as an additional revenue stream and how it's played into your strategy at Iris.
Sure. IREN now, we've had a rebrand.
Oh.
Yeah, before I touch on that, just quickly on the halving, it's interesting or funny. People talk about it as if it's something that's just sprung out of nowhere to us miners. Like, we've known about it for 14 years. To Harry's point, it's all programmed, so you're thinking about it well in advance and preparing for it. We've essentially what we've been building out are power-dense data centres for next-generation compute. So very early on, we had a vision that humanity is going to continue to progress and they're going to require more and more compute. And we've seen it with generative AI recently. But it's a different type of compute to in the past, where this is raw computing power to process all sorts of workloads. And if you look back, the last decade or two, we've seen massive build-out of hyperscale data centres. So these are big data centres in capital city locations, where you're close to customers, so it's low latency. They've got high reliability because they're connected into corporates, hospitals, governments. They just can't go down mission critical. And what we foresaw was a bifurcation in the data centre industry, where you'd start seeing the need for raw compute power that was better situated close to the source of low-cost renewable energy, but in purpose-built data centres that can handle this workload. So one metric I'll give you that is often referred to in the data centre landscape is rack density. So if you imagine a rack in a data centre, which is kind of 6 foot, 7 foot high, a few feet wide, it's how much power sits within that confined space. So traditionally, legacy data centres are around 5 to 15 kilowatts. It's kind of changing quite a bit. We're operating at 70, so much higher, and we've designed for that. The new NVIDIA GPUs, so everyone's probably heard about NVIDIA recently. The ones they're selling, they recommend around 40, maybe a bit more, 40 kilowatts per rack. So all of a sudden, we're operating at 70, we're coming down to 40. Traditional data centres, a bit stuck trying to have to figure it all out. So we built out the platform with this in mind. So we've been building these specialised data centres for a while, and for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been waiting for this opportunity that's presented itself with generative AI. So we ordered our first GPUs late last year, plugged them in early this year, and we're starting to service that market, and it's starting to grow quite a lot.
Well, I guess it's a good Ethereum decided to stop using proof of work so that the GPUs could be a little bit cheaper. So
yeah, that's right.
And we can thank Vitalik for that one, I guess. Jumping over to another revenue stream, Thomas, you at Stronghold, you talked a little about it a little bit. You are cleaning up the environment quite literally with the process of eliminating coal waste. But talk about what kind of revenue streams that's creating. Outside of just doing something good for the environment and mining Bitcoin, you're able to also get carbon credits is what I'm hearing, or is there a different type of additional revenue stream that's in play?
Yeah, so there's carbon credits, there's carbon capture, the benefits of capturing the carbon and then using that in other applications. There's a number of things that are more applicable or derived from the energy side of the business rather than Bitcoin mining. But just briefly, because we had the question on the halving, I thought it might be a good opportunity. The other revenue streams for miners are going to get really interesting as we, process through the halving and then the next couple of months. So Harry mentioned the revenue gets cut in half. The only way to supplement that, because all the cost side for miners are denominated in local currency, right? Overhead, cost of machines, cost of electricity, energy, blah, blah, blah. On the revenue side, that gets cut in half, and the only way to really supplement that is the price of Bitcoin goes up or transaction fee, revenue also goes up. So other large miners, Marathon in particular, has a new product called Slipstream, which organizes blocks in a much more, I would say, effective, esoteric fashion is probably a good way to put it. I think American HODL is doing a presentation on ordinals in a little bit, which will be pretty exciting. But I think when we look at like the other applications and the evolution of a mining operation and getting into other services around mining pools and the structuring of blocks in a way that is maximizing transaction fees, I think a lot of miners are starting to take a hard look at some of the developments that are happening in the inscription and ordinal space to hopefully supplement some of the cuts to revenue that are inevitably coveting.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the ordinal debate is heating up. I'm personally trying to already put together a debate about ordinals and censorship and spam. So that's going to be probably one of the most important conversations that we can have in this space, maybe outside of the ossification debate that has certainly picked up. We have about 5 minutes left on the panel. I want to go back to you, Erik. Something that you said earlier, what I really want to hone down on, you talked a little bit about it, this idea that you're going into rural parts of Africa where they've never had energy before, and now for the first time ever, they have access to energy. Talk about, like, you are there on the ground. You're seeing this happen. You're seeing people go from zero energy to all of a sudden having access to maybe not abundant energy, but certainly low cost enough to begin improving their lifestyles and improving their quality of life. Talk about what that looks like when someone goes from having no energy to have all of a sudden having access to energy.
How many people here have been to Africa? Can you just raise your hand if you've been? Okay, so a good chunk of you have. If you get to rural Africa and the power goes out, or you don't have power, the sun goes down, it's dark, right? It's very dark. And so one of the first things that you have is you have an increase in security when people have energy, right? Because they have electricity, there's lights, and there's additional security. What else you get is kids are now not studying over a paraffin lamp. They're now using an LED light bulb. When a community first gets energy, they don't spend a lot of money. They get LED light bulbs and they charge their cell phones, right? So it's not a big uptake of energy. It takes years before you buy a refrigerator or something, right? You get the health center, the clinic, can stay open at night now. Before they had to shut down when the sun went down because otherwise you're delivering babies with flashlights and cell phone flashlights, right? There's all these things. You can now irrigate easier. You used to have to go 15 kilometers to have your maize milled. Now a maize mill is in your community, and you can just do that more efficiently. So everything improves, right? On that practical level, and it has a huge change in that community. And I think the real question we should be asking as we look at this, at the way this, I never would have thought of it as a silver bullet even when we started the company, but it feels like it is. With Bitcoin mining being added to energy, is there a reason why we're not financing new energy bundled with Bitcoin mining across multiple parts of Africa at the same time? There's abundant renewable energy, whether it's wind, whether it's hydro, whether it's geothermal, whether it's biomass, and we work on 3 of those currently, right now, across 3 countries. There's abundance here, and there's a great case for investment with really good returns, not 20 to 30-year returns, but 5 to 7-year returns. And so I think there's something about, you can do good and make good money at the same time because this dichotomy exists.
Yeah, I've commonly found that in Bitcoin, there is like a thread that runs through all of it, which is that you can do good, you can have a positive impact, you can also get wealthy at the same time. So it's a very unique situation. I like to call it that Bitcoin is financing the rebellion. So I'm very much a supporter of this sort of way of thinking about Bitcoin. We've got about 2 minutes left. There's a really interesting question that we commonly get in the Bitcoin mining world. We all can see where Bitcoin is going. We can see that the energy world and the Bitcoin mining world are seemingly coming together. But the question is, and we have about 2 minutes left, so it'll be maybe a 30-second answer each. What do you think? Is the Bitcoin miner going to buy the energy assets up, the power companies up first, or is the power company going to buy the Bitcoin miner up? We'll go to you, Erik, and then we'll go down.
I'll just answer for my part of the world, which is I think that because energy guys are ossified in the way that they do their businesses, that there's a leverage point over the next couple of years where those of us who are doing Bitcoin mining will lean into actually building energy too, and I think that's a stronger position. I don't know how it'll look in the rest of the world, but I think in Africa, we have a chance to be energy guys as well, and buy out some of those small energy guys to make that happen faster.
Awesome. Thomas?
I think that's a great question. It depends on the location. I think we're going to see that go both ways, depending on the location, depending on the type of miner, depending on the type of power provider. We'll see a pretty broad range there.
Will?
I think that assumes that one buys the other. I think there's a third option, which is they stay a bit separate. I think in the near term, we are seeing that overbuilt supply of renewables at a much lower cost of capital than Bitcoin miners have today. So I think it's going to remain a bit separate for a bit of time. Also, you've got to remember the type of investors investing in renewable energy projects have their own mandates. That doesn't necessarily extend to Bitcoin mining today. So I think foreseeable future, you might not see a whole heap at a super large scale.
I won't make a blanket statement, but I think what I'm most excited to see is I think the Bitcoin miners are differentiated buyers of certain energy assets, where I think a miner understands the value of an asset that might be in a poor revenue environment. And so they'll be able to buy something at what looks like a distressed price, but be able to generate non-distressed revenues out of an otherwise seemingly distressed asset.
Great answers. We had 10 seconds left, but we'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you, everybody, and give a big round of applause.